All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And this is an educational channel where we learn about um, different subjects that you know probably nothing about. But for whatever reason, I think that they're important and things that other people should know or should learn about. Mostly, I work on people, research people who have spent their whole life working on something and never got any credit. Nobody knows about them, but they put out some, you know, magnum opus that summarized their whole life's work. And I stumbled into it and found it to be enlightening for whatever reason. Today is the 143rd video that we're doing on the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a system of theory, a theory of everything, a system where if you understand the system, you can plug it into any subject that you like. It's very empowering in that way. It's difficult to understand mainly because you have to unlearn things or you have to set aside your current way of thinking in order to embrace a different kind of way of thinking. And the general idea behind Larson's system is that we live in a universe made out of motion, not made out of matter, not made out of energy, but made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time, which is a generalized reciprocal relationship. And both space and time have three dimensions. I would say three or more dimensions, and they both are come only in discrete units. Time and space do not really exist in and of themselves, only together in motion. So anytime you have a relationship or a fraction between space and time, regardless of whether time is the numerator or the denominator and vice versa, you have motion. And that is the substance of the universe, the contents of the universe. The legacy scientists see space and time as really being the container of the universe, while Larson sees space and time as being the substance, the contents of the universe. Okay, we're looking at his 1979 book, Nothing But Motion, trying to go over this in his own words with a few comments from me. Now, we are in chapter 3 called Reference Systems. This is difficult sledding right here. Yesterday we got into him kind of explaining the theory in itself, starting with the initial fundamental postulates. And I commented that this is really difficult stuff and this is dry and this is really hard to follow and it's very abstract. And, I stand by that. I don't feel like that is, a slight on Larson. Larson is a person who is attempting to articulate something that's never been articulated before. He's trying to find words to express something that there aren't words for. So he has his work very much cut out for him. When you are coming up with a new paradigm for something, it's very difficult, at first because there is no real language to describe it. And the language that you use, that you choose to use, maybe isn't the best, and maybe it will take a few more people and many more years before there is a language that is effective in transmitting the ideas. So that's why when you read authors like this and people who are trying to come up with new paradigms and theories of everything, you have to be really patient and you have to persevere. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt like, okay, I don't understand this, just move on. Let's move on and get the whole picture and then come back and go over it again. You might have to read it over and over again. That's the only way that you get into this esoteric and obscure literature, is by going over it multiple times. And that's kind of why I record these videos, is because you can just kind of press play and replay and replay, and you can listen to it a couple, 3 times if you didn't really get it, the first time through, and you can use the rewind button and go through certain passages if you didn't understand it. So that's how I've always studied this material. If you read, most of the time when you read it the first time through, you're shaking your head, you're scratching your head, okay, I got a few of those sentences, but I didn't get the whole picture. But maybe I have, you know, I've been able to mark a couple spots that I'm solid in, so I can build on that. And next time I go through it, I'll have a little bit more of an edge to understand it, because I've got a few footholds there, and so that's kind of how you have to do it. Okay, we're going to get into Larson. This is kind of the second half of chapter 3. And I think he's about to start talking about gravitation a little bit, which is just another kind of motion. It has long been realized that while gravitation has been the only known general force, there are many physical phenomena that are not capable of satisfactory explanation on the basis of only one such force. For example, Gold and Hoyle make this comment, quote, "Attempts to explain the expansion of the universe and the condensation of galaxies must be very largely contradictory, so long as gravitation is the only force field under consideration. For if the expansive kinetic energy of matter is adequate to give universal expansion against the gravitational field, it is adequate to prevent local condensation under gravity, and vice versa. That is why, essentially, the formation of galaxies is passed over with little comment in most systems of cosmology." Karl Darrow made the same point in a different connection, emphasizing that gravitation alone is not sufficient in many applications. There must also be what he called an antagonist, an essential and powerful force, as he described it. Quote, may we assume that the ultimate particles of the world act on each other by gravity alone, with motion as the sole antagonist to keep the universe from gathering into a single clump? The answer to this question is a forthright and irrevocable no. Back to Larson. The globular star clusters provide an example illustrating Darrow's point. Like the formation of galaxies, the problem of accounting for the existence of these clusters is customarily passed over with little comment by the astronomers, but a discussion of the subject occasionally creeps into the astronomical literature. A rather candid article by E. Finley Freundlich, which appeared in a publication of the Royal Astronomical Society some years ago, admitted that the main problem presented by the globular clusters is their very existence as finite systems. Many efforts have been made to explain these clusters on the basis of motions acting in opposition to gravitation. But as this author concedes, there is no evidence of the existence of motions that would be adequate to establish an equilibrium. And he asserts that their structure, quote, "their structure must be determined solely by the gravitational field set up by the stars which constitute such a cluster," end quote. This being the case, the only answer he was able to visualize was that the clusters, quote, "have not yet reached the final state of equilibrium." a conclusion that is clearly in conflict with the many observational indications that these clusters are relatively stable, long-lived objects. The following judgment that Finley Freundlich expressed with respect to the results obtained by his predecessors is equally applicable to the situation as it stands today. Quote, all attempts to explain the existence of isolated globular clusters in the vicinity of the galaxy have hitherto failed, end quote. But now we find that there is a second general force that has not hitherto been recognized, just the kind of an antagonist to gravitation that is necessary to explain all of these otherwise inexplicable phenomena. Just as gravitation moves all units and aggregates of matter inward toward each other, so the progression of the natural reference system with respect to the stationary reference systems in common use moves material units and aggregates as we see them in the context of a stationary reference system, outward away from each other. The net movement of each object as observed is determined by the relative magnitudes of the opposing general motions or forces, together with whatever additional motions may be present. In each of the three illustrative cases cited, the outward progression of the natural reference system provides the missing piece in the physical puzzle. But these cases are not unique. They are only especially dramatic highlights of a clarification of the entire physical picture that is accomplished by the introduction of this new concept of a moving natural reference system. We will find it in the forefront of almost every subject that is discussed in the pages that follow. It should be recognized, however, that the outward motions that are imparted to physical objects by reason of the progression of the natural reference system are, in a sense, fictitious. They appear to exist only because the physical objects are referred to a spatial reference system that is assumed to be stationary, whereas it is, in fact, moving. But in another sense, these motions are not entirely fictitious, inasmuch as the attribution of motion to entities that are not actually moving takes place only at the expense of denying motion to other entities that are, in fact, moving. These other entities that are stationary relative to the fixed spatial coordinate system are participating in the motion of that coordinate system relative to the natural system. The motion therefore exists, but it is attributed to the wrong entities. One of the first essentials for an understanding of the system of motions that constitutes the physical universe is to relate the basic motions to the natural reference system, and thereby eliminate the confusion that has been introduced by the use of a fixed reference system. When this is done, it can be seen that the units of motion involved in the progression of the natural reference system have no actual physical existence. They are merely units of a reference system in which the fictitious motion of the absolute locations can be represented. Obviously, the spatial aspect of these fictitious units of motion is equally fictitious, and this leads to an answer to the question as to the relation of the space represented by a stationary three-dimensional reference system, extension space as we may call it, to the space of the universe of motion. On the basis of the explanation given in the preceding pages, if a number of objects without independent motion, such as photons, originate simultaneously from a source that is stationary with respect to a fixed reference system, they are carried outward from the location of origin at unit speed by the motion of the natural reference system relative to the stationary reference system. The direction of motion of each of these objects, as seen in the context of the stationary reference system of reference, is determined. A stationary system of reference is determined entirely by chance, and the motions are therefore distributed over all directions. The location of origin is then the center of an expanding sphere, the surface of which contains the locations that the moving objects occupy after a period of time, corresponding to the spatial progression represented by the radius of the sphere. Any point within this sphere can be defined by the direction of motion and the duration of the progression, that is, by polar coordinates. The sphere generated by the motion of the natural reference system relative to the point of origin has no actual physical significance. It is a fictitious result of relating the natural reference system to an arbitrary fixed system of reference. It does, however, define a reference frame that is well adapted to representing the motions of ordinary human experience. Any such sphere can be expanded indefinitely, and the reference system thus defined is therefore coextensive with all other stationary reference systems. Position in any one such system can be expressed in terms of any other merely by a change of coordinates. The volume generated in this manner is identical with the entity that is called space in other physical theories. It is the spatial constituent of a universe of matter. As brought out in the foregoing explanation, this entity, extension space as we have called it, is neither a void as contended by one of the earlier schools of thought, or an actual physical entity as seen by an opposing school. In terms of a universe of motion, it is simply a reference system. An appropriate analogy is the coordinate system on a sheet of graph paper. The original lines on this paper, generally lightly printed in color, have no significance so far as the subject matter of the graph is concerned. But if we draw some lines on this sheet that are relevant to the subject matter, then the printed coordinate system facilitates our assessment of the interrelations between the quantities represented by those lines. Similarly, extension space per se has no physical significance. It is merely a reference system, like the colored lines on the graph paper, that facilitates cognition of the relations between the significant entities and phenomena. The motions and their various aspects. The true space that enters into the physical phenomena is the spatial aspect of motion. As brought out earlier, it has no independent existence, nor does time. Each exists only in association with the other as motion. We can, however, isolate the spatial aspect of a particular motion or type of motion and deal with it on a theoretical basis as if it were independent, providing that the rate of change of time remains constant, or the appropriate correction is applied for whatever deviation from a constant rate actually does take place. This ability to abstract the spatial aspect and treat it independently is the factor that enables us to relate the spatial aspect of translational motion to the reference system that we recognize as extension space. It may be of interest to note that this clarification of the nature of extension space gives us a partial answer to the long-standing question as to whether this space, which in the context of a universe of matter is space in general, is finite or infinite. As a reference system, it is potentially infinite, just as number is potentially infinite. But it does not necessarily follow that the number of units of space participating in motions that actually have physical significance is infinite. A complete answer to the question is therefore not available at this stage of the development. The remaining issue will have further consideration later. The finding that extension space is merely a reference system also disposes of the issue with respect to curvature or other kinds of distortion of space, and it rules out any participation of extension space in physical action. Such concepts as those involved in Einstein's assertion that space has the physical property of transmitting electromagnetic waves are wholly incorrect. No reference system can have any physical effects, nor can any physical action affect a reference system. Such a system is merely a construct, a device whereby physical actions and the results can be represented in usable form. Okay, that I think we'll stop right there. Just looking at a couple of things, you got to go. This is the key chapter here, chapter 3 right here. So go over today's video and yesterday's video and the one before repeatedly to get this. Now, he talked about the key things that you need to be able to really do this. One is analogy. He's making certain analogies. You got to use those analogies to figure out where you're at. Also, abstraction. Be able to visualize what he's trying to say. Put it in your vision and go over it really slow. Okay, we'll get back to it tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.